The Veracruz cliffs have watched over the Gulf of Mexico for millennia, their rust-colored stone faces scarred by salt spray, wind, and time. Few venture into their narrow ravines. Yet in the spring of 2024, two explorers, a geographer named Carlos and his younger brother Miguel, a historian, received an old family photograph showing their grandfather standing before an unusual rock formation in those cliffs. The photograph, dated 1967, bore cryptic notes on the back. The roots, before they disappear. The brothers had always assumed it was a geological curiosity. But when Miguel discovered a colonial document mentioning piedra grabada con caminos desconocidos, stone carved with unknown roots, hidden in their family's archives, everything changed. What they found in those cliffs would challenge centuries of assumptions about Spanish colonial trade routes and navigation along Mexico's eastern coast. This is the story of how two brothers uncovered what colonial mapmakers had deliberately hidden. Chapter 1. The Photograph and the Archive. Carlos held the old photograph under the desk lamp, the paper brittle and yellowed after decades. His grandfather, a man he'd never met, stood in hiking clothes against a backdrop of towering stone, one hand pointing upward at what appeared to be deliberate markings on the cliff face. Behind him, the gulf shimmered in the distance, but it was the strange geometric pattern carved into the rock that commanded attention. Lines intersecting at precise angles, circles within circles, notches aligned like compass points. "That's our grandfather," Miguel said, entering the study with a leather folder. "I found this while sorting through the old documents in the attic. Look at the back of the photo." Carlos turned it over. The handwriting was faint but deliberate. "Los caminos, antes de desaparecer. Veracruz, Abril 1967. The roots, before they disappear." Miguel opened the folder and withdrew a fragile document, its edges worn and ink faded to brown. It was a colonial-era letter, written in archaic Spanish dated 1742. The passage Miguel pointed to read, "The carved stone near Boca del Rio reveals 5 hidden routes that the Crown forbade us to map. The English must never find them. They remain marked in stone for those who understand the old language of navigation." "Hidden routes?" Carlos looked up. "You mean trade routes, naval passages? Or escape routes," Miguel suggested. "Think about it, Veracruz was constantly under threat. Pirates, rival powers, smugglers. Someone carved these into stone deliberately, someone who wanted information to survive, even if official maps were destroyed." Carlos stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the coastline visible in the distance. Their grandfather had kept this secret for decades. The photograph had been filed away, the document buried among hundreds of others. But why? And more importantly, did that stone map still exist? "We have to find it," Carlos said quietly, "before someone else does." Chapter 2. The expedition begins. The Veracruz cliffs rose from the landscape like jagged teeth, their surfaces weathered into layers of orange, rust, and deep brown. The salt-laden wind carried the smell of the Gulf mixed with something older, the mineral scent of ancient stone. Carlos and Miguel hired a local guide named Diego, a man in his 60s who'd grown up in the region and knew the ravines better than anyone. He studied the photograph with skeptical eyes. "Many people search the cliffs," Diego said, handing back the image. "Treasure hunters, archaeologists, tourists. Nobody finds anything significant. The stone is just stone. The markings are natural erosion." "But you've seen carvings?" Miguel pressed. "Deliberate carvings, not erosion?" Diego was quiet for a moment. "There are places locals avoid, old stories about routes that don't exist on maps. My father said such things were lies told to protect secrets. But yes, I've seen marks. Some look made by human hands." They left before dawn, driving inland toward the coordinates their grandfather had noted on the back of the photograph, coordinates so old they weren't aligned with modern GPS markers. As they hiked into the ravine system, the world seemed to shrink. The cliff walls towered on either side, blocking out the sky into a narrow slot of blue. The ground was treacherous, loose stones, hidden drops, and sudden descents into smaller ravines. Water dripped constantly from overhead, creating slick patches of algae and moss. "Listen," Diego said, stopping abruptly. He pointed upward. For a moment, only the wind answered. Then came another sound. The distant rush of water, deep within the cliff system. A hidden river. "That wasn't here 10 years ago," Diego murmured. "Or maybe it was. But it's never run this strong." Carlos exchanged a glance with Miguel. The environment itself seemed to be testing them. Each step forward met with new obstacles, new uncertainties. They pressed deeper into the ravines, following Diego's instinct and their grandfather's fading coordinates, unaware that they were being watched from a distance by someone who had also been searching for these forgotten routes, and who had no intention of letting them claim the discovery. Chapter 3. The First Marking. After hours of traversing loose scree and navigating blind turns in the ravine, Diego stopped before a section of cliff face that looked identical to every other section, weathered, cracked, covered in lichen. But as Miguel ran his fingers across the stone, he felt it. Deliberate grooves beneath the organic growth. "Here," Miguel whispered. He began carefully brushing away decades of accumulated lichen and dirt. Carlos joined him, working methodically, revealing what lay beneath. A carved line, perfectly straight, too precise to be natural erosion. Then another line, and another. Within 20 minutes, a pattern emerged. A geometric carving approximately 2 meters across, depicting what appeared to be directional markers radiating from a central circle. Some lines pointed toward the sea, others seemed to indicate inland directions. Between the lines were smaller carved symbols, notches, crosses, and what might have been navigational markers. "This is it," Carlos breathed. "The mapmaker's language. Look, these symbols repeat, their deliberate notation." Diego stepped closer, his skepticism replaced by something else. Recognition, perhaps, or unease. "My father spoke of marks like this. He said they were guides left by men who needed to remember routes no one was supposed to know about." Miguel photographed everything, his hands trembling slightly as he documented each detail. But as he stepped back to capture a wider view, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in the dust nearby, and a discarded rope attached to an iron spike wedged between 2 stones. "Someone else has been here," he said quietly. "Recently." Carlos's jaw tightened. "We need to move faster. There's a reason this map was hidden, and we may have just announced that we're looking for it. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 4. The Hidden Descent. The realization that they weren't alone transformed the expedition. Diego led them away from the marked stone, taking a path known only to locals, a treacherous route that descended deeper into the ravine system, toward the sound of rushing water they'd heard hours earlier. The stone beneath their feet grew damp, then slick. The smell changed too. Iron, minerals, and something ancient, as if they were descending into the earth's memory. "The river leads to the caves," Diego explained, speaking quickly now. "The old maps mention them, places where the Spanish hid things during raids. They emerged at the mouth of a cave, enormous and dark, its entrance framed by 2 natural stone pillars that seemed deliberately aligned. The underground river rushed past their feet, audible but unseen in the darkness. Carlos switched on his high-powered flashlight, and the beam revealed what their eyes had been seeking. The cave walls were covered in carvings, hundreds of them, layered across centuries, depicting routes, locations, symbols, and notations that told the story of a navigation system that predated colonial maps. "This is a cartography," Miguel whispered. "An entire system of knowledge carved into stone. Look, these symbols appear on the stone outside. They're connected." But beneath the ancient carvings, they discovered something else. Modern markings, chalk lines, measurements left by someone else who had found this place. Whoever had been watching them was not just seeking the map. They were attempting to decode it. A sound echoed from deeper within the cave. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Someone knew they were here. Someone was approaching. "We have 2 choices," Carlos said. his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "We go deeper and find what's really hidden here, or we leave now and lose everything." Miguel looked at his brother. "We didn't come this far to turn back." They pressed forward into darkness, following the river's sound, the carved stone walls drawing them deeper into history, and toward a confrontation with whoever else understood the value of forgotten roots. Chapter 5. The Chamber of Roots. The cave opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness beyond the reach of their flashlights. The river descended here through a natural gorge, creating a thunderous echo that seemed to come from the earth itself. But what captured their attention was the wall directly before them, a single massive stone face approximately 15 meters wide, covered entirely in intricate carvings. It was the master map. Every route marked on the smaller stones led to this chamber. Every symbol, every notation, every carefully carved line converged here in a comprehensive depiction of navigation routes along the Veracruz coast, extending inland through river systems and overland paths. Some routes were marked with crosses, dead ends perhaps, or routes lost to history. Others were marked with circles, active, viable passages. Between the routes were written notations in a code that Miguel immediately recognized from colonial documents: the merchant's cipher, an encryption system used by Spanish traders to protect their most valuable information. "This explains everything," Miguel said, moving closer to the stone, his flashlight tracing each symbol. "The Crown wouldn't allow independent maritime routes to be documented officially, but the merchants, the navigators, they created their own maps. Stone maps that would survive longer than paper. Maps that only someone trained in the cipher could read." Carlos was documenting everything, but his attention was drawn to something else. At the chamber's far end, partially submerged in the river, what appeared to be a wooden structure, a boat perhaps, or the remains of some vessel. And beside it, partially visible, what might have been containers or chests. "There's more," he said. "Diego, can you—" He stopped. Diego had disappeared. A new voice echoed through the chamber, a woman's voice speaking in Spanish with an accent that suggested professional archaeology. "I was wondering when someone would decipher those coordinates." She stood at the cave entrance, a handheld light pointed toward them, and behind her 2 men blocked the route back to the surface. "The maps are remarkable, aren't they? But they're not yours to claim. They belong to a research institution. They belong to history, not to opportunistic amateur explorers." Carlos stepped protectively in front of his brother. "Our grandfather left these coordinates to our family 70 years ago. This isn't your discovery." "Perhaps not," the woman acknowledged, "but your grandfather never finished his work, and now neither will you. We've been mapping these routes for 3 years. We have the funding, the expertise, the connections to properly document everything. You have—" She paused. "Sentiment." Miguel's mind raced. The mysterious boot prints, the chalk markings, the prepared rappelling equipment. This team had been systematic, professional, thorough. They were prepared to disappear with the discovery, to claim it under academic credentials, to erase the family's connection entirely. But then, from deeper in the chamber, Diego's voice called out, "There's another way. Younger river passage. Goes deeper, comes up 3 kilometers north. I showed your grandfather once." The woman moved quickly, raising a radio to her lips. But Carlos was faster. He grabbed a chunk of fallen stone and threw it hard, striking the woman's arm. The radio tumbled, clattering across stone. The 2 men surged forward, but the chamber itself became their obstacle. Loose debris, uneven ground, the river's edge, a landscape that turned environmental hazard into ally. "Run!" Miguel shouted. They ran toward Diego, toward the sound of rushing water, toward a passage that led deeper into darkness and uncertainty. Behind them, shouts echoed and flashlight beams cut through the gloom. But the brothers had one advantage: a guide who knew these caves, a family history that connected them to this place, and the determination that comes from protecting legacy rather than pursuing profit. Chapter 6. The Legacy Stone. The younger passage was treacherous, water up to their waists, the current pulling insistently, the ceiling low enough in places to require diving beneath stone overhangs. 3 times they thought they'd reached a dead end. 3 times Diego found a hidden passage, a route known only to those who'd lived these mountains for generations. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, they emerged, soaked, gasping, exhausted, approximately 3 kilometers north of where they'd entered, climbing out of a ravine mouth that opened directly onto a hillside overlooking the coast. They collapsed on dry stone, breathing heavily, watching the afternoon light paint the gulf in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, deep within the earth, the master map remained, for now undisturbed. "They'll be out soon," Miguel said. "They'll have explored every exit." "Perhaps," Diego replied. He was wringing water from his clothes, strangely calm. "But they don't know all the passages. Your grandfather and I were young together. He learned much before he left Veracruz. Some knowledge stays in families." Carlos pulled out his phone, miraculously still functional, and reviewed the photographs they'd taken. The stone markings, the geometric patterns, the symbols and roots carved into walls that had stood for centuries. It was documentary evidence, but it was also something more. It was connection, a tangible link between past and present, between their grandfather's quest and their own. "We need to publish this," Miguel said, carefully. "We need to get the information to legitimate archaeologists, to maritime historians. If we control the narrative, if we document everything properly and release it publicly, no one can steal it. No one can claim it as exclusively theirs." Carlos nodded. "We contact the university in Veracruz. We invite peer review. We make sure the roots, the actual colonial knowledge, becomes public heritage. That's what grandfather wanted. That's why he left the coordinates." Over the following months, the brothers worked with historians, archaeologists, and maritime experts to properly document and analyze what they'd found. The stone maps revealed previously unknown trade routes, maritime passages, and even potential locations of colonial-era shipwrecks that aligned with historical records of lost fleets. Academic papers were published. Museums began collaborating on the preservation and study. The master map in the underground chamber was carefully documented through 3D imaging, its carvings preserved for future generations. The woman and her team never emerged from the cave system that afternoon. Whether they found another exit or chose to abandon their search when the discovery became public knowledge, no one ever knew. Diego said only that the mountains kept their secrets from those who didn't belong. What the brothers learned, ultimately, was that the true value of the stone maps lay not in the possibility of buried treasure. No gold or jewels emerged from that underground chamber, but in the knowledge they preserved. Centuries of maritime expertise, navigational wisdom, and human determination, carved into stone so it would outlast empires. The roots were real. The knowledge was priceless. And now it belonged to everyone. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.